They thought he was just another black man trespassing on property he didn't own. What they didn't know, what they never expected, was that he was the FBI, and this was his home. The engine's low rumble faded as Marcus Hayes cut the ignition. He sat in his car for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching the familiar shape of the house he'd worked 20 years to earn. It wasn't just brick and wood, it was a sanctuary. The place he thought about when he was halfway across the world, working cases that never made the news. Finally, after months on assignment, he was back. His own bed. His own porch. His own yard. He stepped out of the car, stretching, and the September air wrapped around him like an old friend. But the peace lasted only seconds. Across the street, blinds shifted. A porch light flicked on. Two neighbors he didn't recognize stood frozen, whispering. Their eyes tracked him as though he were a stranger stepping where he didn't belong. Marcus frowned. New faces. New tension. Something in the air told him this wasn't going to be a quiet night. Keys jingled in his hand as he walked toward the front door. Then came the sharp call from across the street. Hey! You, what are you doing there? Marcus turned. A man in a neon security vest stood on the sidewalk, clipboard tucked under his arm, eyes narrowed like he'd caught a criminal in the act. Beside him, another self-styled patrol officer tapped a flashlight against his palm. This property's not yours, the first man said, stepping closer. We've had reports of suspicious activity. You need to leave before we call the cops. Marcus's jaw tightened. Suspicious activity? He gestured at the house. I live here. The man smirked. Don't lie. We know the owners. They wouldn't just let some guy like you walk up and claim the place. It didn't take long for the crowd to grow. A woman in workout clothes appeared, phone in hand, already recording. Another man walked his dog closer, staying just far enough back to gawk. The two security volunteers boxed Marcus in, puffing their chests out like they were the law. Marcus stood calm, keys still in his hand. He'd been trained for worse than this, interrogations, standoffs, nights where the wrong move meant never seeing tomorrow. But this? This was home. And the insult cut deeper. You're making a mistake, Marcus said evenly. His voice didn't rise. Didn't waver. Just steady steel. The security man chuckled. We'll see about that. The police are already on their way. The faint wail of sirens grew louder. Neighbors shifted nervously, phones still aimed at Marcus as though he were on trial in his own driveway. One whispered, "Guess they finally caught someone." Another muttered, "He doesn't belong here. Just look at him." Marcus's eyes swept over them, faces filled with suspicion, not one willing to ask a simple question before assuming guilt. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on this moment. As the red and blue lights turned onto his street, washing the houses in a harsh glow, Marcus breathed deep. He knew what was coming. He'd seen this play out before, only never against him. He murmured under his breath, almost like a warning to the night itself. You really don't know who you're dealing with. The squad car rolled up slow, headlights slicing across the driveway. Two officers stepped out, hands already hovering near their belts. They didn't look at the so-called security volunteers. They didn't look at the neighbors. Their eyes went straight to Marcus, as though the story had already been written before they even heard a word. Sir, the taller one barked, hand resting on his holster, step away from the door. This isn't your property. Marcus raised his eyebrows, calm but unyielding. That's funny. My name is on the deed. Been that way for 15 years. The officer didn't blink. We got a trespassing call. Neighbors confirmed you don't live here. Don't make this harder on yourself. The security volunteers puffed up, standing behind the cops like they'd just been promoted. One of them jabbed a finger toward Marcus. Told you. He was trying to break in. Probably casing the place. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. More phones came out. More whispers. A teenager muttered, man's about to get locked up. Marcus exhaled slowly. He'd dealt with cartel hitmen, corrupt diplomats, cybercriminals with armies of hackers. But nothing boiled his blood quite like this, being told he didn't belong in the one place he owned outright. "You might want to check your facts before you embarrass yourselves," he said, voice low but cutting. The second officer moved closer, posture tense. "We're not here to argue. Put your hands where we can see them. Step off the property." Keys still dangled in Marcus's grip. He held them up deliberately. "These open the front door. Want me to prove it?" The taller officer's jaw clenched. "That's enough. Hands on your head. Now." A gasp ran through the crowd. The phone zoomed in. This was the moment everyone had come to see, the trespasser being brought down. Marcus's eyes hardened. His training screamed at him to de-escalate, to keep calm, but his pride twisted like a blade in his chest. "You're crossing a line," he said, steady as stone. "And you don't even realize it." One officer reached for his cuffs, the other stepped forward like he was ready to tackle. The so-called security guards grinned, as if justice were finally being served. Marcus didn't flinch. Didn't step back. He let the silence thicken until it was almost unbearable. Then he spoke, each word slow, deliberate. "I told you, this is my property. And you're making a mistake that's going to cost you." The officer scoffed. "Yeah? And what's that supposed to mean?" Before Marcus could answer, the dog-walking neighbor shouted from the curb, "Just cuff him already. He doesn't belong here." The crowd roared in agreement, voices stacking, pressure mounting. It felt less like a neighborhood and more like a mob trial. Marcus raised his hands finally, but not in surrender. His palms opened wide, calm, steady, commanding the space. "You think you're protecting this neighborhood," he said, eyes sweeping over the officers and the crowd. "But all you're protecting is ignorance. You don't know me. You don't know what I've done. And you sure as hell don't know where I work." For the first time, hesitation flickered in the officer's eyes. The taller one shifted, uncertain. But before the pause could settle, the second officer lunged forward, cuffs glinting in the flashing red and blue. The crowd held its breath. Marcus's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "One last warning, stop. Right. Now." The officer froze mid-step. Something in Marcus's tone, authority, steel, certainty, forced him to hesitate. The crowd murmured, confused. The volunteers looked suddenly unsure. And Marcus, standing tall in his own driveway, stared them down with the quiet confidence of a man who had the power to end this entire charade with a single move. But he wasn't ready to reveal his hand. Not yet. By now, half the neighborhood was outside. Porch lights glared down like stage spotlights, phones held up like courtroom cameras. Every angle was being recorded, every breath caught in 4K. Marcus stood at the center, calm but immovable, while the officers closed in. His keys still dangled from his hand, a quiet, stubborn reminder of ownership no one seemed willing to acknowledge. The shorter officer barked, "This is your last chance. Hands on your head, step away from the door." Marcus didn't move. "This door doesn't open for you. It opens for me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. One teenager whispered to her friend, "He's crazy, he's about to get slammed." The taller cop motioned to his partner. "Move in." The second officer lunged forward, shoving Marcus in the chest, trying to push him off the steps. Marcus staggered back one step, his jaw tightening, but he didn't fall. Didn't flinch. "That's assault," Marcus said evenly. "On my property. You sure you want to keep going?" The officer sneered. "You're not the victim here. You're the criminal." Phones zoomed closer. The security volunteers grinned, feeding off the chaos. One of them muttered, "Finally, put this clown in cuffs." Slowly, deliberately, Marcus bent down and slid his key into the front lock. The crowd leaned forward like an audience on the edge of their seats. Click. The lock turned smoothly. The officers froze. The volunteers blinked. Even the neighbors fell silent for a heartbeat. Then the shorter officer snapped, "So what? You could have stolen those keys. Doesn't prove anything." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You're reaching. And you know it." Frustrated, the taller officer drew his cuffs again. "Step back or you're going down." Marcus straightened to his full height, his presence suddenly heavier, sharper. "You touch me, and this becomes more than a bad call. It becomes a career-ending mistake." The crowd buzzed nervously. Some whispered, "Career-ending?" Others muttered, "Who does he think he is?" But Marcus didn't blink. His calm wasn't bravado, it was training, layered in steel. The officers moved in tandem now. One reached for Marcus's wrist, the other for his shoulder. The volunteers edged closer, phones shaking with excitement, desperate to capture the takedown. But Marcus shifted just slightly, his stance rooted, his gaze cutting like a blade. "You really don't want to do this," he warned, voice carrying over the night air. The officer gritted his teeth. "Enough talk." His hand gripped Marcus's arm. The crowd erupted in shouts, half cheering, half protesting. Someone screamed, "This is wrong." Another yelled, "Lock him up already." Marcus didn't resist, not yet. He let the officer's hand linger on his arm, let the moment stretch like a rubber band pulled to the breaking point. His silence became louder than any protest, heavier than any threat. Finally, he tilted his head, locking eyes with the taller officer. His voice dropped, calm and lethal. "You're not just trespassing on my rights. You're trespassing on federal ground." The officer faltered, confusion flashing across his face. What's that supposed to mean?" Marcus gave the faintest smile. "You'll find out soon enough." The taller officer hesitated, but his partner was too far gone, too wound up in the performance. He yanked at Marcus's arm, cuffs snapping open. The crowd gasped, recording every second, adrenaline thick in the air. Marcus stayed rooted, unshaken. Inside, his patience was burning low. He knew the moment to reveal himself was close, very close. But not yet. Not until they crossed the line so completely there would be no escape from the fallout. The metal cuffs clicked open fully, glinting in the flashing red and blue. The shorter officer yanked at Marcus's wrist again, harder this time. The taller one moved behind him, ready to pin his shoulders down. The volunteers cheered softly, smug grins plastered across their faces. Finally, one muttered, "Now we'll have some peace in this neighborhood." Marcus didn't resist. Not yet. He stood like stone, eyes fixed forward, breath steady. Every inch of him radiated control, the kind of control that unnerved men who mistook power for loudness. "You're about to regret this," Marcus said calmly. His voice was low, but it cut through the noise like thunder under the horizon. One neighbor shouted from the crowd, "If you really lived here, why didn't you say so sooner?" Another sneered, "Yeah, probably lying to stall. Just another thug who thinks he's above the rules." The shorter officer smirked, shoving Marcus toward the hood of the squad car. "Thugs don't own homes around here. Not like this one." The words hit Marcus harder than the shove. He swallowed the burn of anger, keeping his mask steady. He'd learned long ago that patience wasn't weakness, it was a weapon. But this weapon had its limits. A voice rang out from the back of the crowd, he had the keys. He opened the door. For the first time, the mob faltered. A few neighbors exchanged looks. Someone whispered, "Yeah, what if he really does live there?" The taller officer stiffened, trying to cover his hesitation. "Keys don't prove anything. Anyone can make copies." Marcus turned his head slowly, locking eyes with the officer. "Anyone can make copies? Of a federal clearance-issued lock system?" The officer blinked. Confusion flickered across his face, but he shoved it down quickly. The shorter officer snapped. "Enough talking." He wrenched Marcus's arm higher, cuffs pressing cold against his skin. The crowd gasped, several voices shouting over each other. "He's not fighting back. Why are you cuffing him? This is wrong." Others still jeered, "Take him away already." It wasn't just a standoff anymore. It was a spectacle, half the crowd rooting for injustice, the other half uncertain, all of it recorded for the world to see. Marcus's patience cracked, but not with anger, with resolve. The line had been crossed. Marcus lifted his chin, speaking with a voice that silenced even the loudest heckler. "I gave you warnings. I told you this was a mistake. You ignored every word. Now, I'm going to give you one last chance to step back before you destroy your own careers." The shorter officer laughed, nervous but defiant. "Careers? Please. You're lucky we don't charge you for resisting." Marcus smiled faintly, cold, knowing. "Resisting? I haven't even started resisting." The taller officer shifted uneasily, his grip loosening. Something in Marcus's tone made his stomach turn. But before he could act, his partner pushed forward, slamming the cuff shut around Marcus's wrist. The metallic snap echoed like a gunshot. The crowd went silent. Marcus stood tall, cuff digging into his wrist, but his expression didn't change. He didn't flinch. He didn't fight. He simply let the weight of the moment hang heavy. Then he leaned closer to the officer's ear, voice calm, controlled, lethal in its quiet. "You just handcuffed a federal agent. And you did it on camera." The officer's eyes widened. His partner froze. The crowd buzzed, confused murmurs rippling through like shockwaves. But Marcus wasn't finished. Not yet. The officer's grip faltered. The word federal hung in the air like smoke, curling into every ear, sinking into every chest. The crowd buzzed, voices sharp with confusion. What did he just say? Federal agent? Nah, no way. He's bluffing. Has to be. Marcus stood still, cuff locked around his wrist, posture unbroken. His eyes scanned the officers, the volunteers, the gawking neighbors. Calm. Controlled. Lethal in his composure. "You want proof?" he asked, his voice steady as stone. Slowly, deliberately, Marcus shifted his free hand to his inner jacket pocket. The taller officer twitched, half reaching for his weapon, but Marcus's gaze froze him in place. From his pocket, Marcus pulled out a leather case. He flipped it open with one smooth motion. The gold flashed under the streetlights. Bold letters edged across the shield, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The silence was deafening. Phones zoomed in, hands trembling. The crowd gasped like a single body inhaling at once. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." The taller officer's face drained of color. His partner stumbled back, stammering. This can't." Marcus turned his head, letting the badge gleam for everyone to see. His voice carried across the night. "You didn't just accuse a homeowner of trespassing. You didn't just assault him. You put hands on a federal agent. On his own property." The words fell like hammers. Every syllable cracked the mob's confidence. The volunteers' smug smiles vanished. One of them dropped his clipboard. The crowd erupted into chaos, half in disbelief, half in horror. Marcus stepped forward, the cuff still hanging from his wrist like a challenge. He looked at the officers with eyes that didn't blink. "You want to finish the arrest?" he asked quietly. "Go ahead. Lock up the FBI. See how that works out for you." Neither officer moved. The shorter one's hands shook. The taller one swallowed hard, sweat breaking across his forehead. The crowd had gone silent again, caught between fear and fascination. Marcus slid his badge back into his pocket with surgical precision. Then he lifted his cuffed wrist. "Take these off. Now." The command wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Authority radiated from him like heat. The taller officer fumbled with the key, struggling to unlock the cuffs as the cameras rolled. The metallic click echoed through the night, louder than the sirens, louder than the murmurs, louder than every insult that had been thrown at him minutes ago. Marcus rubbed his wrists slowly, eyes still locked on the men who dared to humiliate him. The neighbors whispered furiously. He really is FBI. They're done. Those cops are finished. I can't believe we almost let this happen. Marcus finally turned his gaze on the crowd. His words cut deep. Every one of you stood here, ready to watch me dragged away from my own home. Not one of you asked the simplest question, do you live here? You just assumed. The weight of his voice crushed the silence. Faces dropped. Phones lowered. Even the volunteers looked ready to bolt. Marcus stepped closer to the officers, his voice a blade of ice. You profiled me. You targeted me. And you humiliated yourselves. This, he gestured at the glowing cameras, the dozens of recording phones, isn't going away. The officers said nothing. Could say nothing. The power had shifted entirely. Marcus turned back toward his front door, keys in hand. He unlocked it, pushed it open, and paused on the threshold. Then, without looking back, he delivered the final line. You thought I didn't belong here. But I am the law here. And with that, he stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind Marcus. For a heartbeat, the street was frozen in disbelief. Then the murmurs erupted like wildfire. FBI? They're screwed, man, totally screwed. Did you see his badge? That was real. Gold, not fake. The taller officer wiped sweat from his brow, looking like the ground had vanished beneath his feet. His partner whispered frantically, What do we do? What the hell do we do? Neither had an answer. The HOA volunteers, once smug and confident, looked like children caught stealing. The clipboard holder tried to mumble something about miscommunication, but his words drowned under the crowd's outrage. You set this up, someone shouted. You targeted him, another yelled. You almost had him arrested on his own lawn. Phones swung toward the volunteers now, recording their panic. The taller officer tried to regain his voice. Everyone, please disperse. This is a misunderstanding. Nobody's under arrest anymore. Just go home. But the words only fueled the anger. Misunderstanding? You cuffed him. Man, you're finished. He's FBI. This is gonna be on every news channel by morning. The shorter officer muttered, We're dead, we're done, his voice cracked. The front door creaked open. Marcus stepped out again, not rushed, not angry, just composed. In his hand was a phone. Already reported, he said calmly. Internal Affairs, DOJ, and my direct bureau contact all know exactly what went down here tonight. The words dropped like bombs. The taller officer staggered back as if physically struck. The volunteers' faces drained of color. Marcus descended the porch slowly, each step deliberate. He pointed at the HOA men. You lied. You provoked. You tried to humiliate me in front of my own neighbors. That's obstruction of justice, because you interfered with a federal agent. Then he turned to the officers, his voice sharp as a blade. You put hands on me. You cuffed me without probable cause. That's assault on a federal officer. Do you understand what that means? Neither could answer. Both just stared at the ground. The crowd wasn't silent anymore. They weren't spectators, they were witnesses. One neighbor shouted, We're with you, Marcus. Another added, This whole thing was a setup, we all saw it. More phones went up. The HOA men looked cornered, sweat pouring down their foreheads. What had started as their show of power had turned into a public trial, with Marcus in control. Finally, the taller officer broke, his voice shaking. Look, sir. Agent, we didn't know. If we had known. Marcus cut him off coldly. You didn't need to know. My rights don't depend on your awareness of my job. I was a homeowner on my own lawn. That should have been enough. The officer shut his mouth, shame flooding his face. Marcus scanned the street, his voice measured and final. You think tonight is over? It isn't. There will be reports. There will be investigations. And there will be consequences. Not tomorrow. Not next week. No. He raised his phone again. Every second of this is documented. Every face, every word. The crowd shifted uneasily. The HOA men looked ready to collapse. The cops looked like their badges had turned to lead. Marcus took one last look at the trembling group before turning back to his house. This property is mine. This neighborhood is mine. And starting tonight, every single one of you will answer for what you tried to do here. He stepped inside, shutting the door with a quiet click. The silence left behind was deafening. The officers stood paralyzed. The HOA men slunk away under the weight of dozens of recording phones. The neighbors whispered to one another, voices heavy with shock. It wasn't just a scandal anymore. It was a reckoning. The sun rose over the quiet suburban street, but peace was gone. News vans lined the curb, cameras mounted high, reporters buzzing like hornets. The night's chaos had gone viral, clips of Marcus flashing his FBI badge spread across the internet like wildfire. Headlines screamed across screens. Cops arrest FBI agent on his own property. HOA showdown goes national. Federal agent targeted in suburban standoff. By dawn, everyone in the city knew. By breakfast, the entire country was watching. Neighbors who had whispered in the dark now stood in daylight, giving statements to news crews. He was calm the whole time, one woman told the microphone. They treated him like a criminal, but he never lost control, said another. They thought he didn't belong here. Turns out, he belonged more than anyone. Every word added fuel to the fire. Inside the HOA's small office, the volunteers sat pale and sleepless. Their leader, the clipboard holder from the night before, slammed his hand on the table. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to be FBI. Another muttered, it doesn't matter. The cameras caught everything. We're done. They're already talking lawsuits, federal obstruction. The phone rang nonstop, angry homeowners, reporters, lawyers. No one answered. At the precinct, the two officers sat across from internal affairs. Neither spoke much. Their eyes were hollow, their uniforms crumpled. Assaulting a federal officer, the investigator said flatly. Illegal detainment. Unlawful use of force. Do you know how many years that carries? The taller officer swallowed hard. His partner whispered, we thought he was lying, we thought he was just another homeowner mouthing off. The investigator's stare didn't soften. You thought wrong. Back at his home, Marcus stood on his porch, not as a suspect, not as a victim, but as a voice. Reporters pressed close, microphones raised. Last night wasn't about me, he said firmly. It was about how easily authority can be abused. They didn't ask questions. They didn't respect rights. They assumed guilt, because of how I look, because of who they thought I was. His words carried weight, broadcast live across the nation. This isn't just my fight. This is every American's fight, for dignity, for fairness, for justice. In Washington, D.C., the Department of Justice issued a statement. We are aware of the incident involving FBI agent Marcus Hill. A full federal investigation has been opened into the conduct of the responding officers and the HOA representatives. The Department of Justice will ensure accountability. Within hours, it was the top story nationwide. The HOA's email inbox crashed under the weight of furious messages. Sponsors withdrew. Lawyers lined up against them. Several board members resigned before noon. The police department announced both officers were placed on unpaid leave pending federal charges. Their names trended online, attached to shame. The neighborhood that once backed the HOA now turned against it, siding with Marcus. As night fell, Marcus sat quietly in his living room. His phone buzzed nonstop with messages of support, from colleagues, from strangers, from people who saw in him a reflection of themselves. Through the window, he could see neighbors leaving food on his porch, notes tucked under the door. One simple line written on a card stood out: "Thank you for standing your ground. You stood for us, too." Marcus leaned back, silent but resolute. The battle wasn't over. But the tide had turned. Flashing cameras blinded the gray stone entrance of the county courthouse. Reporters swarmed, microphones jutted like spears. The news had not died down, it had grown. Today was the hearing. The two officers, pale and hollow-eyed, shuffled past the cameras in silence, lawyers at their sides. Federal charges weighed heavy: assaulting a federal officer, unlawful detainment, abuse of power. Their careers were over before the trial even began. Behind them, the HOA board filed in. No clipboards. No smugness. Just fear. Their authority had collapsed like wet paper. Neighbors filled the gallery, phones tucked away, eyes sharp. They'd come not just for Marcus, but for themselves. Videos were played, Marcus being cuffed, Marcus flashing his badge, the crowd gasping. Every frame burned into the record. Every second undeniable. One officer muttered, "We didn't know," but the judge cut him off. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. Especially when you wear the badge. The HOA's lawyer tried to argue community protection, but Marcus's testimony silenced it all. They didn't protect the community, Marcus said firmly. They tried to control it. They targeted me not because of what I did, but because of who they thought I was. The courtroom was still, his words carrying weight beyond law, into conscience. The gavel struck like thunder. The officers, guilty of misconduct, federal assault, stripped of badges, facing years behind bars. The HOA, fined heavily, dissolved by court order, barred from reorganizing under any new name. The neighborhood, freed from the grip of intimidation that had ruled them for years. The sound of justice was louder than the gavel. It was the crowd exhaling, finally free. Reporters surrounded him as he stepped onto the courthouse steps, the fall air crisp, the cameras relentless. "What do you have to say now, Agent Hill?" one shouted. Marcus paused, looked out at the sea of lenses and eyes. Then he spoke quietly, but every word carried. "This was never about me being FBI. This was about a homeowner, a citizen, treated as less than human. My badge proved who I was, but it shouldn't have taken that to prove I belonged." The crowd erupted in applause. Not the wild cheer of entertainment, but the deep approval of truth. Weeks later, the black gates with the HOA logo were torn down. The office shuttered. The neighborhood bloomed again, not under fear, but under cooperation. Families who had been silent before now spoke up, smiling, waving at Marcus when he walked his lawn. Children played in the streets without their parents glancing nervously at HOA patrols. The neighborhood had been reclaimed, not by rules, not by fines, but by its people. One evening, Marcus sat on his porch. No cameras. No microphones. Just the hum of crickets and the slow glow of the setting sun. He looked at his house, his home. Still standing. Still his. The fight had been brutal. But it was worth every second. Not just because he won, but because the truth had been exposed. He leaned back, exhaled deeply, and whispered to himself, "This is what justice looks like." The neighborhood was free. The law had prevailed. And Marcus, once accused of trespassing on his own land, had become the symbol of belonging no one could deny.